Good morning, everyone. My name is Pierre-Andre Mortemousque, and it's my great pleasure today to talk about my work on electric clock transitions of donors in silicon detected by spin-independent recombination. Superconducting qubits are the best candidate for the realization of a quantum computer, as operation on a single qubit, algorithm on multiple qubits, and quantum non-demolition measurements have already been demonstrated. However, they have to work at low magnetic fields in order to preserve the superconducting states, and they suffer from a rather short coherence time. This coherence time problem can be solved by connecting such a qubit with a memory. And in solid state, donors in silicon are the best candidates for such quantum memory, as both the electron spin and the nuclear spin have very long coherence time, such as 2.7 seconds for the electron spin or 3 minutes for the nucleus of phosphorus in 28 silicon. Then, to make such a memory at low magnetic fields, only bismuth in silicon is suitable because it has very large zero field splitting, and this zero field splitting is of the same order of a typical superconducting qubit transition. So we will use bismuth in silicon, and to realize such a memory, we need a spin readout technique at low magnetic fields. Such a technique has already been demonstrated by Hiroki Morishita a few years ago, and he demonstrated the readout of the phosphorus donor electron spins, nuclear spin and electron spins. Using a similar technique for bismuth in silicon, we detected EPR transitions and NMR transitions at low magnetic fields, shown on this spectrum here. In this report, we also address the problem of SDR line intensities. As you can see, lines have different intensities for the same microwave power. But in this report, we did not address the problem of the asymmetric spectral broadening, as you can see for this line here. Lines are quite broad, and the broadening is asymmetric. So in this study, we will show that this broadening is the main broadening mechanism for SDR spectroscopy, and this broadening vanishes at special points called electrical clock transitions. And away from these points, the broadening can be explained by a molecular theory. So an electric clock transition for such a spin Hamiltonian is defined using this relation, where nu is the transition frequency and A the donor-Haber-Fine coupling. In fact, an electric field will change the electron wave function, which in turn changes the donor-Haber-Fine. So when this derivative vanishes, the EPR transitions, for example, are insensitive to electrical field variations. And bismuth in silicon has 4 ECTs, electric clock transitions. And in this study, we are interested in this one at 7.3 gigahertz. So to probe such electric clock transitions, we used 2 samples, bismuth in 28 and natural silicon. The use of 28 silicon is crucial to remove the homogeneous broadening due to the Haber-Fine of the donor with the 29 silicon nuclear spin. And such an enrichment can remove this inhomogeneous broadening. And we compared those spectra with natural silicon. So after bismuth ion implantation, we annealed the sample to activate those donors for 30 minutes at 650 Celsius in an evacuated quartz tube. Using those samples, we performed SDR spectroscopy. And under illumination, photoexcited carriers are created, and they get trapped by ionized donors, here bismuth for example. Then, in presence of a paramagnetic recombination center, depending on the relative spin states, they can recombine in the singlet configuration, or they live forever or for a long time in the triplet configuration. So it comes that at a steady state, we have only those pairs remaining. Those are recombining. So when we apply magnetic resonance on the donor, we flip this electron spin. So we go to this configuration, and this recombines. Now when it recombines, number of carriers, this number is decreased. So the photoconductivity of the sample is decreased. And in our experiment, we probe this change in photoconductivity at 9 GHz in an EPR cavity. And we recorded this change in photoconductivity using a lock-in amplifier. So we observe the second derivative of this line shape. So at X band, we indeed observe 10 transitions for bismuth, shown here. And when we want to observe electric clock transitions at 7.3 GHz, we have to use an additional coil inside the cavity to shine this frequency here. And the result is here for natural silicon. The first spectrum here, corresponding to this transition, is at the expected position, but it exhibits an interesting feature. It's broadened toward high fields. Then the last transition here, shown here, is broadened toward low fields. And for the electric clock transition, this one, the line shape is symmetric and significantly narrower. We observe the same features for bismuth in 28 silicon, but please note the different horizontal axis scale. So when we compare this line broadening, here and here, when we compare it to the sensitivity of the resonant magnetic field on the hyperfine coupling, we can say that this broadening is consistent with a decrease in the hyperfine. And we attributed this decrease in hyperfine to the interaction between the bismuth donor and the readout center. We saw this because the electron G factor probed by SDR suggests that this donor electron orbital is coupled to the readout center electron orbital. Then we used molecular theory to explain such a broadening. Here in the first plot, we have, for isolated wave functions, we have the donor wave function here and the recombination center wave function here. Those wave functions are unperturbed, but when those two centers are close enough, in this plot here, they interact. And in fact, the donor electron is sucked away by the readout center. And we have the similar process in the other way around. So we can see that those wave functions are depending on this separation D here, and they also depend on the spin states. Depending on singlet triplet configurations, the Pauli blockade can occur, and this distribution can be modified. Using such wave functions, we can calculate the donor hyperfine using this formula here. In this formula, we have this term rho, which is electron density at the bismuth nucleus, and we have to sum this density for the two electrons because we have two electrons in the system, donor electrons and readout center electrons. This density, as we have seen previously, is spin dependent and depends on the separation. The spin dependence here leads to an hyperfine tensor with different terms, and each term depends on the separation here. But you can see for all those terms, the calculated hyperfine is consistently decreased from the bulk EPR value. And now, before actually simulating SDR spectra, we need to know the contribution of SDR pairs to the SDR signal. And in the sample, we have bismuth atoms, randomly distributed, and around them we have redox centers or defects. Now, we assume that the recombination of the donor electron is done at the nearest recombination center. And we call this separation R. So, to know the contribution of those pairs to the overall signal, we need to know the distribution in this parameter R. And this distribution is written here, and for different redox centers concentrations, we have different expected value of the effective redox center. For larger concentration in redox center, it's closer to the donor. It makes sense, I hope. And combining this result with the hyperfine simulation, we can simulate SDR spectra for 28 bismuth in 28 silicon and in natural silicon. And you can see when we increase the concentration in redox center, we expect the redox center to be closer to the donor, so wave functions are more interacting. And this interaction makes the hyperfine more disturbed or more distributed. And here we can see that this line shape is significantly different than this one. Now we also have to discuss other parameters of this model, which are the redox center energy levels. The ionization energy of the defect here has a very little influence on the SDR spectra. So we set it at minus 0.5 electron volt from the band gap. However, the correlation energy, defined as the electron repulsion at the redox center, plays a major role. And using to see this correlation energy effect, we have this plot for 28 and natural silicon. Increasing this correlation energy parameter will when we increase this energy, the wave functions have to relax into higher excited states, and wave functions are more disturbed. So the larger the correlation energy is, the more disturbed will be the hyperfine. Now, we have to quantify those line shape in order to compare with experiments, and for this we used the SDR line moments. We use the variance, second standardized moment, to measure the line width, and the third standardized moment, which is the skewness, to measure the asymmetry. And we have those plots. For the variance, plot as a vertical axis here, as a function of the redox center concentration here, and the correlation energy here. The rate surface here corresponds to the experimental value found for 28 silicon. We can do the same plot for the skewness, and when we look at those two rate surfaces, they intersect at a single point, giving the parameters we have for our system, which is about 10 to 19 per cubic centimeter of redox centers, and 0.3 for the correlation energy parameter. Using those parameters, we can simulate in red the spectra for the last transition for both 28 and natural silicon. I want to stress that those simulations were done with the same parameters, only changing the line width. And we can see that this fitting is quite agrees well with experimental values. Those parameters found here are acceptable or good for the concentration, because such a concentration is expected from the high energy implantation of bismuth and the low crystal recovery from the annealing process. And the correlation parameter is compared, when we compare it with the same parameter for PB node centers, it's of the same order at least, so it's acceptable. So we can say here that this model this molecular theory reproduces well the line shape. And now, before concluding, I would like to extend this work to other group 5 donors. So to do so, we have a map of EPR transitions of phosphorus here. As a line thickness, we plot this value, which is the sensitivity of the resonance frequency on the Hyperfine constant. So you can see here the sensitivity very small, and it's maximal here at high field, or here for very low fields. Then at low field, because states are not pure spin states, we have those two processes occurring at the same time, and we have to correct for intensity using this model. And we plot the expected SDR intensity as a color scale. And we can see that at high field, both transitions are visible, but at low field, they vanishes, or SDR intensity vanishes. Now for group 5 donors, for phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, and bismuth, we can do the same plot. For bismuth in silicon, here, for the electric clock transition, we see that the line thickness is very small, and the sensitivity vanishes at this point. However, for X-band here, this sensitivity is maximal. This is why we could probe such an interaction. And before concluding, we can see an interesting fact that in this region, or here, SDR intensity vanishes for all donors in silicon. So, in this study, we successfully demonstrated the existence of electric clock transitions for bismuth in 28 and natural silicon. Away from these points, the line is significantly broader, and we could explain this broadening using a molecular theory. And to conclude, I'd like to say that in 28 silicon, for bismuth in 28 silicon, this interaction is the main broadening mechanism, and we have to get rid of it for efficient coupling. So thank you.